After 50, being stuck feels different than it did in your 20s or 30s. Back then, stuck meant you hadn't found the right path yet. You still had time to pivot, restart, reinvent. But now stuck feels permanent. Like you've made all your major choices and you're living with the consequences. You wake up every day knowing exactly what will happen because it's the same thing that happened yesterday. The same routine, the same frustrations, the same sense that life is passing you by while you watch from the sidelines. And the advice everyone gives: set big goals, make a plan, transform your life, feels exhausting because you're tired of starting over, tired of grand visions that never materialize, tired of believing that one big change will finally make everything click into place. But here's what nobody tells you. After 50, transformation doesn't come from big leaps. It comes from small steps. Not the kind of small steps that feel insignificant, the kind that feel almost insulting in their simplicity. Steps so small, you're embarrassed to call them progress. But those steps, they're the only thing that actually works when you're stuck. Because being stuck after 50 isn't about lacking ambition or courage. It's about having tried big changes before and watched them fail. And small steps don't fail. They accumulate. Here's the paradox. You know small steps work. You've heard it 1,000 times. One day at a time. Baby steps. Rome wasn't built in a day. All the cliches that sound true but feel useless when you're actually stuck. Because the problem isn't that you don't understand the concept of small steps. The problem is that small steps feel like giving up. They feel like admitting defeat, like accepting that you'll never have the dramatic transformation you once believed was possible. When you were younger, small steps were a strategy on the way to something bigger. But now they feel like all you have left, like you're settling for incremental progress because you don't have the energy or time for anything more ambitious. And that feels like failure. So you resist small steps. You tell yourself that if you're going to make a change, it should be meaningful, significant, worth the effort. You wait for the right moment, the right motivation, the right circumstances. You make plans for big changes, losing 50 pounds, changing careers, fixing your marriage, becoming the person you always thought you'd be. And those plans sit in your head, getting more elaborate and more paralyzing while nothing actually changes. Because big plans require resources you don't have anymore, energy you used to have, time that's running out, optimism that's been worn down by years of disappointment. Big plans after 50 feel like setting yourself up for another failure, and you can't afford another failure, not at this stage. But here's where the paradox deepens. The reason you're stuck isn't because you haven't made big enough changes. It's because you've been trying to make changes that are too big. Every time you set a massive goal and fail to achieve it, you reinforce the belief that change is impossible. Every time you commit to a dramatic transformation and give up after 2 weeks, you lose trust in yourself. Every time you promise yourself this time will be different and it isn't, you dig yourself deeper into stuckness. Not because you lack discipline or willpower, but because you're trying to solve a 50-year-old problem with a 20-year-old strategy, and it doesn't work anymore. The truth is, after 50, your relationship with change has to change. You can't rely on the same methods that worked in your youth. You can't push through exhaustion. You can't sacrifice everything for a goal and hope it pays off later. You can't bet your entire sense of self-worth on one big outcome. Your body won't let you. Your life circumstances won't allow it. Your emotional reserves are too depleted. And yet, the cultural narrative keeps telling you that meaningful change requires dramatic action. That if you're not transforming your entire life, you're not really trying. That small steps are for people who lack ambition. So you stay stuck, waiting for the energy to make a big move, convinced that anything less than a complete overhaul isn't worth the effort. Meanwhile, small steps sit there, available, accessible, waiting for you to stop dismissing them as insufficient. But you can't bring yourself to take them because they feel like admitting that this is all you're capable of now. That you've become the kind of person who celebrates walking around the block instead of running a marathon. Who takes pride in making one phone call instead of overhauling their entire social life? Who considers it progress to cook one healthy meal instead of committing to a complete diet transformation? Small steps feel like shrinking your ambitions to match your diminished capacity. And that feels like dying slowly instead of living fully. But what if the opposite is true? What if small steps after 50 aren't about settling? What if they're about finally understanding how change actually works? What if every big transformation you've ever witnessed, in yourself or others, was actually built on thousands of invisible small steps that no one talked about because they weren't dramatic enough to make a good story? What if being stuck isn't a sign that you need to do more, but a sign that you need to do less and do it consistently? What if the reason small steps matter more after 50 is because you finally have enough life experience to sustain them? To recognize that sustainability matters more than intensity. That direction matters more than speed. That showing up matters more than breaking records. Small steps don't feel powerful, but they are. And the sooner you stop waiting for a big breakthrough and start taking small steps, the sooner you stop being stuck. Understanding why small steps matter more after 50 begins with redefining what progress actually means. For most of your life, progress probably meant moving toward a goal, getting closer to an outcome, achieving something measurable. But after 50, progress is less about destination and more about direction. It's not about reaching a finish line. It's about consistently moving in a way that aligns with who you want to become. And that shift from outcome-focused to process-focused is what makes small steps not just useful, but essential. Because outcomes are uncertain. You can't control whether you'll lose the weight, fix the relationship, find the career, or become the person you envision. But you can control whether you take the next small step. And when you're stuck, controlling the next step is all the power you need. The first principle of small steps after 50 is radical specificity. Not, I'm going to get healthier, but I'm going to drink a glass of water when I wake up. Not, I'm going to be more social, but I'm going to send one text to one friend this week. Not, I'm going to figure out my life, but I'm going to sit in silence for 5 minutes tomorrow morning. The reason specificity matters is that vague intentions create vague actions, and vague actions don't create momentum. When you're stuck, you need clarity. You need to know exactly what the next step is so that you don't waste energy deciding. The step should be so clear, so concrete, so small that there's no ambiguity about whether you did it or not. And when you complete it, you know. That knowing, That clear evidence that you did what you said you'd do is what starts to rebuild trust in yourself. The second principle is designing steps so small they feel embarrassing. This is where most people fail. They intellectually accept the idea of small steps, but then design steps that are still too big. They say they'll walk for 10 minutes, but on a day when they're exhausted, 10 minutes feels impossible. They say they'll call one friend, but if they're feeling socially anxious, making a phone call feels like climbing a mountain. The step has to be small enough that you can do it even on your worst day. Even when you're tired, unmotivated, depressed, overwhelmed, if the step requires motivation, it's too big. The step should be so small that motivation is irrelevant. You can do it whether you feel like it or not. And yes, that means the step might feel ridiculous. Putting on your walking shoes without actually walking, opening the document without writing anything, sitting at the table without eating a full meal. These steps feel too small to matter. But they're not too small. They're exactly the right size for someone who's stuck. Because being stuck means your capacity is limited. And small steps honor that limitation instead of fighting it. The third principle is repetition over variation. When you're stuck, novelty feels appealing. You think maybe if you just try something completely different, that will break the pattern. But after 50, novelty is exhausting. Learning new things takes more energy than it used to. Your brain doesn't adapt as quickly. Your body doesn't recover as fast. So instead of constantly trying new approaches, pick one small step and repeat it. Same step, same time, same context, every single day. This is counterintuitive because it feels boring. It feels like you're not making progress if you're just doing the same thing over and over, but repetition is how habits form. And habits are what carry you when motivation disappears. When you repeat the same small step in the same context, your brain starts automating it. It stops being a decision you have to make and starts being something you just do. And that automation is what creates lasting change. Not because the step itself is transformative, but because you stop needing willpower to do it. It becomes part of who you are. The fourth principle is embracing imperfection. You will miss days. You will forget. You will choose not to do the step even when you could have. And that's not failure. That's being human. The difference between people who get unstuck and people who stay stuck isn't that the people who get unstuck never miss a step. It's that they don't let missing one step become a reason to quit entirely. They don't spiral into shame and self-criticism. They don't decide that because they missed today, they might as well give up. They just take the step again tomorrow. No drama, no guilt, no story about what it means that they missed a day. Just the next step. This is especially important after 50 because perfectionism has probably been part of your identity for decades. You've been the person who finishes what they start, who follows through, who doesn't quit. And now you're tired. You can't maintain that standard anymore. So you have to let it go. You have to accept that progress after 50 is messy, inconsistent, full of stops and starts, and that's okay. Because messy progress is still progress. Another essential insight is that small steps work not because they lead directly to big outcomes, but because they change your identity. Every time you take a small step, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you want to become. You're not just drinking water. You're becoming someone who takes care of their body. You're not just texting a friend. You're becoming someone who maintains relationships. You're not just sitting in silence. You're becoming someone who creates space for reflection. And over time, those votes add up. Your identity shifts, not because you forced yourself to become someone different, but because you acted like that person enough times that it became true. This is how transformation actually happens, not through dramatic reinvention, but through small repeated actions that gradually reshape who you are. Small steps also matter because they protect you from the all or nothing thinking that keeps you stuck. When you commit to a big goal, every day becomes a test. Did you do enough? Did you measure up? Did you make enough progress? And on the days when the answer is no, you feel like a failure. But with small steps, there is no test. There is just the step. Either you did it or you didn't. And if you didn't, you take it tomorrow. There's no judgment, no scorecard, no sense that you're falling behind, just the next step. And that simplicity is liberating. Because when you're stuck, the last thing you need is more pressure, more ways to feel inadequate. Small steps remove that pressure. They make change feel manageable instead of overwhelming, possible instead of impossible. One of the hidden benefits of small steps is that they create momentum without exhaustion. Big changes require big energy investments. And when you're over 50, big energy investments come with a cost. You burn out. You overextend. You sacrifice other areas of your life to fuel the change. And eventually, you collapse. The change doesn't stick because it wasn't sustainable. But small steps don't deplete you. They don't require you to rearrange your entire life. They fit into the life you already have. And because they don't exhaust you, you can sustain them indefinitely. And sustainability is what matters most. Because a small step you take every day for a year will produce more change than a massive effort you abandon after a month. Small steps also work because they bypass resistance. When you decide to make a big change, every part of you that's attached to the status quo fights back. Your fear screams that you're going to fail. Your shame tells you that you don't deserve success. Your exhaustion convinces you that it's too hard. And that internal resistance is often enough to stop you before you even start. But small steps are so non-threatening that resistance doesn't activate. Your brain doesn't perceive putting on walking shoes as a threat. It doesn't resist opening a document. It doesn't fight back against sending one text. The step is small enough that it slips under the radar of your internal defense systems. And once you've taken the step, once you've started, continuing becomes easier. Not easy, but easier. Because the hardest part of any action is starting. And small steps make starting as easy as possible. Another reason small steps matter more after 50 is that they allow for experimentation without commitment. When you're stuck, you often don't know what will actually help. You have theories, ideas, advice from others. But you don't know what will work for you until you try it. And if trying something means committing to a big change, you'll hesitate. Because what if it doesn't work? What if you invest all that energy and it leads nowhere? But small steps let you test things without risk. You can try meditating for 2 minutes and see if it helps. You can try journaling 3 sentences and notice how it feels. You can try going to bed 15 minutes earlier and observe the impact. And if it doesn't work, you haven't lost much. You just try a different small step. This experimental approach is how you discover what actually moves you. Not through analysis or planning, but through action and feedback. Small steps also create evidence. When you're stuck, you stop trusting yourself. You've made promises before and broken them. You've set goals and failed to achieve them. You've committed to change and given up. So you don't believe yourself anymore when you say you're going to do something, but small steps rebuild that trust. Every time you take the step you said you'd take, you prove to yourself that you're capable of following through. Not in a big, heroic way, but in a quiet, consistent way. And that evidence accumulates. It becomes a counterweight to the years of broken promises. You start to believe that maybe you can change. Not because someone told you that you can, but because you have proof. You did the thing you said you'd do. Today. And yesterday. And the day before that. And that proof is what allows you to take slightly bigger steps later. Not because you're forcing yourself, but because you trust yourself enough to try. Perhaps the most important reason small steps matter after 50 is that they're sustainable for the rest of your life. Big changes are temporary by nature. You can't maintain extreme effort forever. Eventually, you return to baseline. But small steps don't require returning to baseline because they never took you far from it. They're not a departure from your normal life. They're a slight adjustment to it. And that means you can keep taking them. Not for a month or a year, but for decades. And when you think about change over decades instead of months, the power of small steps becomes obvious. A small step taken every day for 10 years will reshape your entire life. Not dramatically, not visibly, but profoundly. And that's the kind of change that lasts. Not because it's forced, but because it's integrated into who you've become. When you finally commit to small steps, the first thing that changes is the weight of your own expectations. For years, you've been carrying the pressure of needing to transform your entire life. Every day felt like a test you were failing. But small steps remove that pressure. You're not trying to become someone completely different. You're just taking the next step. And that simplicity is liberating. You stop waking up feeling behind. You stop going to bed feeling inadequate. You start recognizing that showing up, even in the smallest way, is enough. You also rebuild trust in yourself. Every small step you complete is evidence that you can do what you say you'll do. Not in some distant future, not when conditions are perfect, but today, right now. And that evidence accumulates. You start believing that change is possible, not because you've read about it, but because you're living it. Your relationship with yourself shifts from disappointment to respect. You're no longer someone who makes promises and breaks them. You're someone who takes small steps and keeps taking them. Your energy changes too. Big goals drain you because they demand everything at once. But small steps preserve your energy. They don't require you to sacrifice your entire day or exhaust yourself trying. You can take a small step and still have energy left for the rest of your life. And that sustainability means you keep going. Not for a week or a month, but indefinitely, because the step doesn't cost you more than you can afford to give. Over time, you notice that the small steps have accumulated into something bigger. Not a dramatic transformation, but a quiet shift. You're healthier without having completed a massive fitness program. You're more connected without having overhauled your social life. You're more at peace without having solved all your problems. And you realize that this accumulation of small, consistent actions is what real change looks like. Not the before and after story, but the unremarkable, everyday practice of showing up. And that's more powerful than any dramatic transformation could ever be. You don't need a breakthrough. You don't need the perfect plan, or the right motivation, or ideal circumstances. You don't need to wait until you feel ready, or inspired, or capable of something big. You just need to take the next small step, not tomorrow, not when things settle down, today, right now. One small, specific, embarrassingly simple action that moves you even slightly in the direction you want to go. That's all. And then tomorrow, you take another one. And the day after that, another. Not because you're building towards some grand transformation, but because small steps are how you stop being stuck. Being stuck after 50 isn't a life sentence. It's not proof that you've run out of time or options or capacity for change. It's just what happens when you keep trying to solve your problems with strategies that no longer work. Big goals, dramatic plans, all or nothing thinking. Those strategies worked when you were younger because you had different resources. But now you need a different approach. You need small steps. Steps so small they feel insignificant. Steps so simple they don't require motivation. Steps so sustainable you can take them for the rest of your life. And here's what you'll discover. Those small steps don't just move you forward. They change who you are. They rebuild your trust in yourself. They prove that you're capable of change, not someday, but right now. They show you that progress doesn't require drama or intensity or perfection. It just requires showing up, consistently, imperfectly, one small step at a time. And when you look back months or years from now, you won't remember the individual steps. You'll just notice that you're no longer stuck. That somewhere along the way, without realizing it, you became someone who moves forward. Not because you forced yourself, but because you took small steps. And you kept taking them. That's all it takes. That's all it ever took.